So now let's go ahead and talk about homework 3, problem 2, because it follows essentially the same ideas that we've been talking about. So we all know what it says. Write a function file that takes in input arguments m and c. Remember, m and c are generic, so any values within the context that c is larger than the size of m. So when they're outputting s, mtl, mtr, mbl, and mbr, and this is a description of what those outputs are. So we have already seen it. Okay, so once again, going through my steps, writing a function. What code needs to go in my function? To do that, we need to go ahead and figure out what an example looks like. So I have 2 examples here. Let's say m here is a 2 by 4, and let's say m here is a 3 by 2. And let's say c is 5 in both instances. Start by writing out what it's supposed to look like. So MTL should look like this. So let's say MTL started out at zeros. So MTL starts out at zeros. The size of MTL is C by C, so we could say C comma C, or you can just do 1C. And then starting to think about, okay, modifying an array. What do I want to change? What do I want to store? Where do I want to store something? Is it all of an array? Is it part of an array? Which rows? Which columns? I want to change MTL. Which rows do I want to change? In this example, rows 1 to 2, columns 1 to 4. What do I want to store there? I want to store M. Okay, do those 2 match? Is this the same number of rows and columns as this? Okay, so once again, going back and thinking about, okay, why is it 2? Why is it 4? Let's see if how my code changes if I have a different example. So over here, let's do MTL. Once again, starts out at zeros. And then over here, it would be rows 1 to 3, columns 1 to 2. Looking at the change. Okay, so this 2 changes, this 4 changes. Over here, it's a 3 and a 2. Why is it a 2 and a 4 over on this side? Why is it a 3 and a 2 on this side? And the reason why it's a 2 and 4 over here and a 3 and 2 over here is because that's the size. So MTL is going to be changed. It's 1 to the number of rows in M. Comma 1 to the number of columns in M. Equals N. Okay, if we go ahead, so we've got MTL down. I'm going to go ahead and jump down to MBR because MTR and MBL are a combination of the 2. So for MBR, same idea. Okay, start out with our example. M is the same, C is the same. How does MBR change? So over here, MBR starts out at zeros. Same size, size C. And then I'm changing MBR. Which rows? 4 to 5. And then which columns? 2 to 5. Okay, so thinking again, how does each of these change? Over here, it's MBR. It's going to be columns or rows 3 through 5 and columns 4 through 5. So once again, why are my numbers what they are? So first thing first is it's not always going to be 5. It's 5 now because C is 5. So we could change this to C. We could also change it to end, because we always want it to be all the way up to the end of our columns. Now I need to think about, why is it 4 and 2? Why is it 3 and 4? If you think about physically placing this matrix, and you're thinking about, okay, where do I need to place it? Let's say it starts out at zeros. Because it does. If I were to place this matrix as a 2 by 4, okay, so that means I have to count 1, 2, 3, 4 columns back and 2 columns up. I need to replace these ones. So starting here at my end, I can work my way backwards. Same thing in your code. This number is the end, or C, minus the number of rows in M. So we started with something. We go ahead and check our logic. So 5, so end is 5. If I subtract the number of rows, or the number of columns, number of rows, 5 minus 2, That gives me 3. So that would give me all the way to this column. I don't want that column, I want the one below it. I'll just add a 1 to it. Same idea here. It's end minus the number of columns in M plus 1 to the end. We'll see it in code in a minute. I'll write it clearer on the side. So I start at the end and I subtract the number of columns. So 5 minus 4 would get me this one. I don't want that one. I want 1 plus. So MBR ends up being end minus number of rows plus 1 all the way to the end, comma, end minus the number of columns plus 1 all the way to the end equals M. End is just it's just essentially a shorthand way to say the last column in my matrix. So this end corresponds to this matrix. If I had M end and MBR end, the end means different things depending on, the end is a different value depending on which matrix. So this is the end in M, this is the end in MBR. Okay, so we've written it generic. We can go ahead and look at the code for this. And it looks something like this. I need to figure out the number of rows in M and the number of columns in M, so I'm going to use the size function. This is S. If I do size of M, it's going to give me my size as a 1x2 array, which was the definition of size in the document. And I've just broken it up here. You don't have to do this. I'm just clearly illustrating that the first number in S is the rows. The second number in S is the columns. Then MTL starts out at zeros, and I just have MTL 1 to rows, 1 to columns equals M. Because that's why I determined it to be generically on my document, in my example. For MBR, it starts out at zeros, and here's my code. Starting at the end, I want to subtract the number of rows in M plus 1 all the way to the end. So those are the rows I want to change. And then same thing with columns. I start at the end, and I want to subtract the number of columns I have plus 1 all the way to the end. That's equal to M. So I've written something. I've defined my other 2 outputs as well. But I've written something, and I need to go ahead and test it. When you run your function, you can't run a function file, you can't literally press run, but we can test it, we can call it. So identifying what is the name of my function, what function am I trying to test, what function am I trying to call, what are my inputs supposed to be, M and C. M is just an array of any size, C is just a scalar with the bigger than the size of M. So I've just said M is a random array, 3 by 5, C is 7. So C needs to be bigger than 3 and bigger than 5. So how many outputs do I have? I have 5 outputs. So I need 5 variables to store my answers in. A will store whatever S is, B will store whatever MTL is, C will store whatever MTR is, D will store whatever MBL is, E will store whatever MBR is. Equals the name of my function, my inputs. So this is S. This is MTL, so we can see my array was placed in the upper top left, and here is MBR. So my array was placed in the bottom right. That's how we approach this function.